Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Industry Insights. I am your host, Leah Troscianecki, and I am joined today by a very old and very good friend of mine, Michael Cade. That wasn't a comment on your age because we're very close in age. It's more of a comment of just how many years that we have behind us.
For sure. Hi, Leah.
All right, awesome. Well, Kate and I have done this show before in various formats. We've done podcasts, we've done episodes of Industry Insights, we've done webinars, and we tend to be, two of the folks at Veeam who spend a lot of time talking about cloud. All things cloud. Michael, in particular, is one of our experts on containerization, Kubernetes in particular, or as he would pronounce it as Kubernetes, which is so much more interesting than the way I say it. So we love a good accent on our shows here. And then in particular, I have a long history working at Microsoft, working on Azure solutions. Those of you joining us from our VCSP community, hopefully you all recognize me from many, many years of working together. And the reason I'm kind of peppering in a lot of this previous experience is I think we're at an interesting point in our industry, given geopolitical changes, given changes in the technology industry, where we're all taking a step back and really looking at vendor relationships at large. How are we thinking about these relationships from a contract and licensing perspective, from a technology and interoperability perspective, from a future planning perspective? There's just a lot of questions out there. So, Michael, I know in particular, sorry, I keep saying Michael as if this is a formal relationship. Cade is the only somebody earlier was like, Michael, what do you need today? No, it's Cade. So Cade, when you were in the field as one of our field CTOs talking with customers, I know just having you and I chatted a lot, you spend a lot of time talking about vendor lock-in and vendor lock-out, whether that's taking a look at Veeam and saying, how is Veeam going to work with me in the future? Or I think more broadly, how do we look at the storage space, the application space, and figure out how we can really build relationships for the future? So do you want to give us a little bit of a primer of vendor lock-in, vendor lock-out?
Yeah, I think we're so laser focused, and by we, I mean like the customer, the industry, about being locked in. Or we can't be locked in because if we're locked in, then how do we go anywhere? How do we make a change? And we'll get into some of that. But I heard so coming from the Kubernetes world, there's a guy called Kelsey Hightower. Basically, started. He was the first evangelist around Kubernetes, and he started talking about this terminology around lockout. And we'll get into a bit more about that. But by being so laser focused on being not locked in to a particular cloud vendor or a backup vendor, like what are you locking yourself out of? And I think it's very important for us, Leah, because one of the things I've been at Veeam for I've just coming up to 10 years, and the differentiator that we had at the start of that 10 years was that portable data format. And that if you no longer want to be a Veeam customer, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but if you don't want to be a Veeam customer anymore, like that's fine. Like you're not going to have to pay a maintenance fee to to be able to recover those workloads, those longer backups. And I think that is a true way that a vendor should be. Is well, you should be allowed to walk away. You should be allowed to leverage other areas if the first one hasn't kept up with innovation. So I think it's a lot about innovation. I think it's a lot about cost. I think it's a lot about risk, and all of them we're going to get into as we go through the session. So
We definitely are. And I want to make sure that you all know that we are live and we are happy to take any questions you have, any comments you have. In particular, Kate, I think you have a fan, Ruben, said, good to see you, Michael. So I think you've got a
good
fan in the
stuff.
chats already. Awesome. Well, speaking of that chat, we wanted to just kind of kick things off with just a light conversation here with the audience. So we wanted to ask you all, what's the purchase that you've made that you regret the most? As not that every purchase has to be through that negative lens, but I think we all have a bad car buying experience. We've all regretted really investing in something. And Kate, I know in particular, when we were putting this show together, you kind of instantly had an idea of a recent experience where you maybe had a little bit of regret.
Yeah, so I'm sure I'm not the only technologist that started the pandemic with a wallet wide open to go and buy all the tech to keep you entertained. And I went out and bought a particular AR headset that had all of the like they had all of the base stations around, and it was all cable, and the instant regret was like maybe 2 3 weeks later the Oculus Quest came out, which was a computer in itself. You just popped it on your head and off you went. You didn't have all of this setup. So I basically used this AR headset once, and yeah, never again. So yeah, that's kind of my biggest regret.
Yeah, and it was a big expenditure, right? That now is
Yeah.
virtually obsolete because of a lack of interoperability and the whole ecosystem that comes around it. I know the same thing happened with my family way back in the day. My family was really big into home theater, and we're all super handy. So we poured our blood, sweat, and tears into building this amazing home theater with like beautiful walnut wood. And my dad and I had put together like surround sound speakers that went into the joists of the walls, and then we covered them with these like fabric panels. I mean, it was a stellar home theater. We are very in. And we had to make a critical choice in the early days of DVDs. Do we go HD or Blu-ray? And we researched and we thought about it, and we knew it was this like inflection point in the industry. And we chose wrong. We rolled the dice wrong. We did not pick Blu-ray, and we had to go and change a lot of that infrastructure, which wasn't a big deal. But when you then look at the data, bringing it back to some of our topic today, we didn't get to experience the richness of a lot of those DVD media pieces. We'd have to buy new versions of them. And I think we're going to keep seeing this pop up across all different kinds of B2B and B2C technology categories. So I don't know, man. I think this show is maybe pretty timely. It certainly feels timeless, but I think it's going to be even more timely as the year rolls on. And part of that is, I think, again, as we look at vendor lock-in and vendor lock-out in concept, there's just these things that really put you stuck in this kind of relationship. It may be pretty limited in flexibility. There might be a really high cost of switching. The solution may lack interoperability, right? You kind of have to go all in on certain clouds for most offerings, as an example. There may be some big contractual obligation, which you might be able to weaponize and use in your favor, right? Looking at things like volume-based agreements, or even saying, hey, there's another show in town that I could easily go to. There's ways to play that game, but regardless, contracts are always going to be some sort of handcuff experience. I think something in particular that we're going to talk about is innovation and the relationship to these vendors. And of course, data ownership, right? Looking at those physical media pieces, looking at ways that we can make sure that our data itself isn't locked in. Cade, I know we put this together for our sales kickoff earlier this year, and a lot of our team really loved it, especially as we looked at it from the lens of our data portability story. So do you want to pull out any kind of interesting insights here?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, everyone in the industry is so fixated on the left of this, on the vendor lock-in, and not necessarily thinking about what they're missing out on or being locked out of, from the slides perspective. And I think there's like a wiggly line going down the middle that kind of touches on like a nice middle ground to be, whether that's your databases, whether it's your unstructured data, whether it's even your platform. So I'll use the Kubernetes example as my example. Maybe we start on-prem with Kubernetes, and we're just getting a look and feel of what that needs to look like. And then you realize that, or maybe that upkeep and the management of that, the overhead of that is not worth it. Let's take advantage of one of the managed Kubernetes clusters in the cloud. Maybe it's GKE, EKS, AKS, for example. Well, Kubernetes is great because you don't have that lock-in per se. You can lift and shift that workload quite easily, and with what we do, like, allow you to get that data there as well. And I think not necessarily being so fixated on that lock-in, but let's not lose out on new versions, new capabilities. Postgres, for example, as a database, just came out with version 17 maybe just before or just after Christmas. You don't want to be using an older version of that database application as you're trying to be in front of the competition. So make sure that you're in a place where you can take advantage of that. And then this, like all the costing and being able to, so as much as on lock-in, you might have high switching costs, but if you're in a position where you can move from one vendor to another from a virtualization point of view, that's going to give you that freedom of being able to move that workload and potentially save costs if the timing's right on those platforms as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the talk track is being informed by, one big switch that I think we're all kind of aware of. And Diego in particular on YouTube mentioned this. We are afraid of Broadcom, ... You know why. I do, Diego. We all do. And in fact, we actually did a survey of CIOs last year in partnership with CIO Magazine to really examine this conundrum with the VMware Broadcom acquisition and just get some cold hard facts here, right, of what people are faced with, because there is no one right answer of what to do when this kind of vendor that is so ubiquitous in a lot of our infrastructures gets acquired and has some pretty significant changes, right? So one lens in particular is looking at cost. And overall, 56% of CIOs expect to decrease their use of VMware because of these costs, right? So we're looking at how much time, effort, licensing costs is it going to take to really continue to maintain VMware, let alone increase or decrease any kind of experience. When it did come to decreasing, because I think that's the kind of trigger response, right, is to look at these kinds of vendor changes and say, well, then, we're just going to take our show elsewhere. But the reality is the migration cost of switching is so high. And we actually took a look at this in many lenses last year, but in particular in preparing for our sales kickoff this year, I had a chance to chat with our CIO, Nate Kurtz, who we're actually going to have some interviews with on this show today. And I put these numbers in front of him and said, what was Veeam's experience as we were looking at our VMware relationship? And he said, all of this is very accurate, is really close to what we experienced. And I think that in taking a step back, Nate and team really thought about what do we want to do here? Yes, we can have a trigger response, but let's think more broadly about our data strategy. And Cade, I know in particular, this is something you're super passionate about. And I think recently gave a really interesting webinar. We kind of pulled some insights from that webinar for today's show. Talk to us a bit about data.
Yeah, I think like
we've
we've blown the walls off the data center, right? In terms of we're not just in one location anymore, and our data is spread across all these multiple platforms. And I think the question that I asked in that webinar was, do you understand your data? I.e., what is the most critical part of that data, down to we still need it, but it's probably not as important, especially when bad things happen. But you need to know where that most critical data is. And this starts from the creation of data, and something we'll talk about around lifecycle management of that data. Understanding that data is probably key to a lot of things, whether it's how you protect that data, how you move that data, where it is available, and all of that good stuff. And the ideal, and I'd love to know if people that are watching, like what's the take? Do you understand your data, or does it look like this big circle here where, yeah, I know that I've got a load of data, I don't necessarily know how that concentric circle actually looks with the gold, silver, bronze type approach of what that data is. Because by understanding what that data is, the sensitive data, etc., where it lies, how it's protected, how often it's protected, that leads into not only good hygiene of that data, but equally when you come to restore that data when bad things are happening, be it a ransomware attack or just some accidents happen, like at least I know where that mission critical data might be. It might be HR, it might be finance, equally it might be some databases here or there in the cloud. But ultimately, if I know where that critical data is, I can restore that back fast, and maybe that's on a different backup schedule that allows us to have a better RPO as well as an RTO. So I think like my biggest takeaway from that webinar was understanding your data. Go away and try and understand a little bit more, because I think that will be a solid foundation to being able to then put a solid plan together around being able to either move that data, protect that data, recover from that data, and all of that good life cycle management type stuff with that data.
And I think something that's interesting to note with this is obviously thinking about data management. It's a much bigger elephant than anything in the backup space can handle, right? But backup, resilience, recovery, these are all parts of data management. So I think it's helpful for us to at least have that kind of lens and perspective. So I know today we're going to talk a bit about some kind of actionable ways that you can bite into this concept of data strategy. And then we'll also talk about that through the lens of vendor relationships and give you all some actionable insights that you can take back to your organization, especially if you're working on something like 2026 budget cycle planning or going into a vendor contract renewal. Hopefully we can give you all some things to really think about, especially from the place of backup, recovery, resilience, all of that good stuff. So you'll see this lovely graphic and we'll talk a bit about it throughout today's show. On the vendor side in particular, we're going to really double click into three concepts of vendor relationships, vendor lock-in and vendor lock-out. So the first is really looking at trust in that vendor or lack thereof, especially given kind of recent changes in the industry. The next double click will be all about cost and really looking at how you can contain and maybe even optimize costs throughout this kind of change. And then finally, risk mitigation, right? How can we try to feel more comfortable and more in control throughout these kinds of wild swings and changes in our industry? So that's really the lens that we're going to be looking at everything through. And to kick us off with that, make sure that this is super interactive for you all. On the audience side, we're going to keep having a couple of polls as part of this show. So I wanted to ask you all in the audience today, is your organization re-examining major vendor relationships this year, especially in the wake of that Broadcom acquisition last year? If you are thinking about that, what are you considering doing? Are you thinking about just retaining it because it's too big, too monolithic, too important? Are you thinking about migrating some or all of your data? Are you thinking about retiring entirely, right? Looking at deprecating something and buying SaaS or PaaS as an example. So we really want to hear from you all in the comments. Let us know. We've got our social team looking at all the different platforms we stream from, and we've got a chat where we're pulling some of that into. So if you want to say hi, if you want to, let us know what your organization is dealing with. If you guys have questions, please put those in the comments and we'll be sure to pull them out throughout the show today. But with that, I think, Cade, we're going to talk a bit about the first set of ways that we can eat the elephant, so to speak, of data lifecycle management, which is really looking at applications and infrastructure, the houses of our data. So tell us a little bit about why this is some of the first steps for you.
Yeah, so again, this goes back to that webinar where we go into a lot more detail, but ultimately, if we look at the lifecycle management around application, now this could be you're developing your own software. So you deploy, you're creating your code, you're testing that, you're deploying it, and it's a life cycle of that. However, there's also many of us. In fact, I imagine most of us on the call on the show are buying off the shelf software. You're deploying that, an update will come from the vendor, and you're deploying that, and you have to consider that as infrastructure admins, as IT managers, C-level execs. You're going to be worrying about going from version 1 to version 2, and then you're going to have to run that somewhere. And that's where I was talking about blowing the four walls off the data center, in that now infrastructure used to be a data center, but infrastructure now can mean like Leah mentioned, SaaS. It could mean IaaS, infrastructure as a service, in the public cloud. It could also mean platform as a service, PaaS, in the public cloud as well. And at that point, you've got to think, how do we build that? How do we manage and deploy that for the application that we need? And again, whilst also thinking, okay, I don't want to be locked in, but equally I don't want to be locked out. So we need to build this in a way that I can freely move that wherever, or at least have that in the back of my mind, because you might be moving to another hypervisor, you might be moving to the public cloud. Okay, what's stopping that from doing the same thing that we're seeing in the industry today, around that cost conundrum that we all face? All of that then couples into that data lifecycle management, which I mentioned, around you've got the flow, the creation, the usage, and then the deletion of that data, whatever that lifespan looks like. whilst also thinking about bad things that happen around resilience. So how do we factor in business continuity, high availability? Equally, then how do I protect it so that if something bad happens, how do I restore that as fast as possible, and all of that good stuff. And that's hopefully all of these are continuous loops as well that get us thinking about how we protect and deploy our applications whilst running them in the most suitable place possible.
And I think that most suitable place piece is really important because it is it's never going to be a clean answer. And I think that's where really working together as an IT team and then really examining these vendor relationships is going to be so critical, because frankly, a lot of this is an art and a science debate all up, and there's many different lenses through which you can look at it. Speaking of those lenses, this is specifically the kind of question that I posed to our own CIO, Nate Kurtz. So we're going to feature some clips today from an interview I did last week with Nate. Nate has been with us for several years now. We love working with him on the Veeam side. He's very generous with sharing his time with us because he's got a business to run. It's Veeam's business. We're a pretty big company at this point. We've got lots to do, but he's super passionate about sharing some of our own experiences here at Veeam with our community, because at the end of the day, I think the space continues to evolve rapidly, and it's such a cliche in anything you do in IT, like everything changes really fast. Correct. But it seems to be changing even faster than what we're all used to. And so I think being able to share some of these insights and trends that we're seeing, it's just going to make us all be able to make decisions faster. Nate in particular leads a big team here at Veeam. He spent over 10 years at F5. He has experience working at KPMG, managing Microsoft, Amazon, F5. He's also a US Army vet. So we really love chatting with him because I think he is all about that team camaraderie and really building kind of value together as a group. So you'll see that as a trend throughout some of these clips. First, I wanted to feature a clip from my interview last week talking a bit about building vendor trust, especially as his teams are thinking about infrastructure changes and application changes and, what is that right fit approach. So let's go ahead and roll that clip, and then Cade and I'll talk a bit about it.
All right. Thanks for having me, Leah. Thanks for the question. So when I think about what I'm seeing in the market with the partners that we work with, I think of them in kind of two kind of buckets. One, you have your vendors who are more your traditional kind of, you're focused on licensing, you're focused on cost. They're not truly embedded within your organization, and so we have software vendors that are in that kind of space. Then we also have our strategic partners. And this is really what I'm excited about and where I see the market going is we have a mutual, it's a beneficial relationship, and it's mutually beneficial for both of us. Those are the partners that I want to work with. They're actually embedded within our organization. Their success and our success are intertwined. And what I see is an emergence of, as we're working through those types of relationships with partners, they're in that kind of 3, 4, maybe even 5-year contracts that we're signing up. And I think that's great, right? We want to make that investment within their technology. We want to see the true value of it. Sometimes it takes time to do that. I'm also seeing the emergence of a lot of customer success managers embedded within our organization from our strategic partners. So they're part of our organization. We're measuring KPIs, how we're doing with their solutions. What's also exciting about that is we're able to inform the product roadmaps that our partners have. By them being embedded within our operations, we're able to inform them of the emerging needs that we have. And so by doing that, they are able to actually build their product to support our needs. And it's exciting. At the end of the day, we want to get the most value out of our partners. And I see that continuing to evolve and mature. And as we continue to kind of intertwine our relationship. And so excited to see, and I think it's a great place that the market is moving.
Awesome. So, Nate was super generous with his thoughts there. And I had heard from his team before about this idea of vendors versus partners, and what an important distinction that is, and really offering some ideas of how you can build more of a partner relationship. And Cade, I know in particular, when you meet with Veeam customers, that's always the sentiment that we're trying to drive. In particular, road mapping was something that Nate mentioned. Do you want to talk a bit about why, a lot of our customers are looking for that information from us, again, from the lens of looking at us as their partner in resilience?
Yeah, and it's always great to hear from Nate, like customer zero, right? But yeah, in regards to like my role out there in the field is definitely about delivering what we're doing, where we're going, what the vision, what the strategy looks like, what the nuts and bolts that are coming down the line, and really customers just want that. I guess they want that hug, basically, to say we're going in the right direction. Like if we were to turn around and just say, yeah, we're not going to do anything this year, we're just going to concentrate on really legacy, old school servers. We're not going to really do anything in the cloud or within Kubernetes. Like that's not going to give them the future, the hug that they're going to want. And even though that customer might never ever go to Kubernetes in 2025, just knowing that we're thinking about where they could be going is always a good feeling, I guess, from a customer point of view. And I'd couple that with a lot of those roadmap sessions is also coupled with a lot of feedback. The feedback that I gets fed into product management and R&D for us to go and look at all the other areas. Like when I first started, Leah, about the same time that you had your first stint here, we had one product, right? We looked after virtual machines on VMware and Hyper-V. That's it. Now, if you look at the portfolio, it's like 22 different platforms that we protect, and that all comes from a feedback loop of the industry about our customers and where they're going. And I think that's super important. Like without that, we don't necessarily always know what road to take.
Absolutely. And I mean, I vividly remember being part of the launch teams for Agent for Windows, Agent for Linux, Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. And so much of that continuous improvement and innovation comes from our community engagements and really hearing from you all what you're being challenged by. So not only keep that up with the Veeam team, but keep that up with your vendor relationships in general. I know sometimes you feel like you're screaming into the void, but I promise as technology gets more and more sophisticated and we're able to claw feedback from a million different places, vendors hear it. Right. So even if it may seem like we're just screaming about it, it does somehow get through as places to innovate on. So that's a really good place, I think, to stop and then talk about our next double click, which is all about cost containment. And I mentioned cost containment because that's, I think, the pain point that a lot of you are struggling with. And I know a bunch of you all, when we asked about whether or not you're thinking about switching from a vendor, several of you guys put in comments across different platforms. As far as I know, price increases aren't coming with a value increase. So we're looking at alternatives to X, Y, and Z. That's a lot of the commentary that we're seeing in the chats. Keep that commentary coming. But on this kind of cost conversation, a lot of this is more than just the capabilities. It's also the impact to the team. So I wanted to ask you all in the audience, in managing or supporting your IT budget for 2025, are you being asked to examine and calculate cost of people to support? This could be headcount. This could be estimated time spent. This could be outsourcing contracts. Let us know how you all are dealing with the people and process side of this equation. And that's because I think, Cade, there's a lot of ways we can slice and dice cost. But I think you and I both coming from the cloud space and really spending a lot of time talking about, the R's of cloud migration and how you can manage cloud FinOps. We spent a lot of time talking about this, and it really does seem to come down to planning, having a data strategy, thinking about the talent on staff, and ultimately thinking about reducing the amount of time spent standing something up too. So talk to us a bit about people and process.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to that cost conundrum that you're going to face if you're looking to get off a hypervisor and go to another hypervisor or the cloud. You've got to think about the total amount of time it's going to take, but not just the people around that, but equally the skills that those people have had. most of you might have had VMware skills in-house for the last 15 years, and those people only know VMware from a virtualization point of view. So to flip around and say, oh, you have to go and learn Microsoft Azure, or you have to go and learn AWS, or we're going to get rid of you and we're going to bring in new people, that's not going to be great for morale. And equally, if you're using VMware today, and which I stand by, like it is the better hypervisor available, with if you're using the features that are available there, things like NSX networking, software defined networking, is not up to par with potentially other hypervisors. So you're going to potentially pay another cost when it comes to features and functionality when you're moving as well. So I think that's a huge thing to consider, not just the collaboration of people, the change, the skills, and all of that good stuff. I think they're all considerations when it comes to the people side of things.
They definitely are. And that was also kind of a big conversation that I had with Nate, was when Veeam has been looking at these kinds of changes, how is it impacting his team's planning cycles? What is he asking his team to do to really examine a lot of this? And he took a step back and had a different answer than what I expected. So I want to, again, pull in this conversation with Nate, because we just got so many great nuggets. And in particular, really tee up this idea he had about not necessarily looking at speeds and feeds, and not necessarily looking at, time spent on something. What is the bigger picture here? So let's roll that clip.
Yeah. So, I think I talked about it, earlier as well, which is whenever I'm working with a solution provider, I always want to move into that strategic partnership relationship as much as possible. At the end of the day, yes, we are in technology, but we're also in the people business. And I think by having those tight relationships with those partners, it's amazing what you can accomplish together. It makes those difficult conversations easier. What I also have found too is, as you build those relationships with those strategic partners, the amount of value and the amount of flexibility they're willing to give you always surprises me. And I think that's great, right? They want to see us successful. When we're successful, they become more successful. The relationship grows, the contract grows, all of that. And so I think is, any type of partner that I'm working with, I immediately want to try to get into that strategic partner relationship. I think too, when we're looking at the relationships, there's this concept of vendor lock that I know is out there. That's I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I think ultimately, as CIOs and as IT departments, you have to find those partners that you're willing to make that investment in and you're willing to commit to. When you think of like your financial system, your CRM, maybe your case management system, like those are not decisions that you're just going to make on a 12-month horizon. Those are long-term commitments. And so there is an element of lock that you're going to have with those. And I think that's okay. What you want to do is focus again on those relationships. You want to find those platforms that not only serve a single purpose, but also handle multiple areas of your business. I tend to think of it as the 80-20 rule as well. Like if I can do 80 or 90%, let's say, with a platform, that's better than going out and finding a point solution that does 100%. Simplifies your integrations, simplifies your operations. You don't have to train people on multiple technologies. They can be very well versed in a platform, and it allows you really to get the full value out of that investment you make.
All right. Well, hopefully that gave you a really good sense of some of the things that Nate and team are contending with. And in particular, really looking at this idea of whether or not vendor lock is this big, scary concept, or if you can really flip it on its head and look at these kinds of relationships from a different perspective. And I think that's super important as we look to drive value, which is that flip side of cost, right? Not just speeds and feeds, not just time spent on something, but what else can we do here? How else can we spend our time, our money, our resources, and ultimately try to drive more revenue for the businesses that we work for? Or drive to the mission, right? There's certainly so much more than revenue. But on that front, I think there are lots of things that we can do to better support those missions. And that really brings us beautifully into our third and final double click of the show, which is all about risk mitigation. And I think that's a nice transition because, we all in the IT space are bringing these skills and technologies into the space so that we can achieve outcomes for our organizations, whether that's achieving mission critical results, whether that's keeping costs down, whether it's maintaining uptime and avoiding data loss. There are all these outcomes that we want to achieve. And really the only way that we can confidently know that we achieve those outcomes is through things like day two operations. Are you reporting? Are you automating? Are you doing things like data governance and compliance and looking at security best practices? So I want to know from you all in our audience, much of the visibility and optimization of a project comes down to day two. What percentage of your time would you say you spend on day two? I would imagine that most of you are going to write down a percentage and it's going to be less than what you would want it to be. I know Cade and I spent a lot of time with our community members talking about this, that the road is paved with the best of intentions, but sometimes MVP is all we can deliver. And I think it's really important that we then wave the flag for our leaders so that they understand what the cost would be of not prioritizing some of that time. And I know, Cade, when we were, again, putting this talk track together, one of our big goals was to talk about observability and how important that is for data lifecycle management, as well as security. So talk to us a bit about these two.
Yeah, you'll notice all of these are continuous circles, right? Because you're never done. You're never done from an application, whether you're building or whether you're buying off the shelf. There's version 1, there's version 2, etc. The infrastructure probably changes from a database point of view or from a platform perspective, whether it's virtual, physical, virtual, cloud native. Like, there's a continuous journey. Then we get to observability. How do we understand what's happening in our environments? Well, we need to monitor that. We need to analyze that data. But I also want to massively know if there's anything bad happening. Give me the alerts. And then from a security point of view, it needs to be constant. We can't give away God mode. We need to make sure that access management is covered. We need to inspect that access is always governed and made sure. And then even the connection between each of these services needs to be secure and encrypted to a degree as well. And that's a continuous. It shouldn't just be a afterthought, which it probably was many years ago. All of these life cycles need to go hand in hand. They need to be a continuous loop and then loops within themselves. And hopefully you've seen how and we'll see in the final slides, how they interlock with each other as they go through as well.
Yeah, and that's, I think the looping idea is so important because it should be continuous improvement. It's never going to be a zenith that we can all reach out and touch because it's just not a linear fashion. This is something that you have to sit down and every day focus on. And, some organizations are super reactive and some organizations do recognize the importance of that and ultimately how it does help them achieve their mission critical efforts. And to that end, we actually had a chance to take a look at some of the work that we've done with some of our customers, and in particular, some of our IT leader customers, because so often we work with you all who have hands-on keyboard experience working with Veeam, and you all know the importance of good backup, confident recovery, having observability, aligning something into your security tech stack. But I think what we hear from you all in the community is not every person up your food chain understands that inherently, right? So sometimes we need to be talking that talk track and managing up the food chain. But in some organizations, they get it. And I think Florida is a really good example. So we had a chance a couple of months ago to chat with our customer, David, who's the CIO of Florida. They are a leader in the pool and wellness space. They employ about 6,500 staff members, and they're headquartered in Spain, speaking of accents. And one of the reasons that I wanted to pull this interview was, he talked a bit about how important it was to centralize data protection services for his organization, especially as they looked to different applications and different infrastructures, whether it's data center, outside of the data center, in these SaaS applications that they've really standardized their businesses on, and ultimately how he sees that standardization process as unlocking more efficiency, unlocking more security. So let's look a little bit at that interview and hear from David himself.
We are in a city very close to Barcelona, in Sant Cugat. Fluidra is a Catalan company, Spanish company, founded in 1969, so it's 55 years old, and we're here in the headquarters. My name is David Bulta. I'm the CIO Office Director in Fluidra. We're a multinational in the pool and wellness sector. We have presence in more than 45 countries, and we employ approximately 7,000 people. Nowadays, cyber attacks are more and more frequent everywhere. The consequences for us could be catastrophic. We have a lot of data to back up. We're talking about 2 petabytes of data. And in terms of virtual machines here, we're talking about 1,200 worldwide. So huge numbers. The worst scenario is now the ransomware attack, because they encrypt your data, so systems are not working at all, and then they force you to pay for the de-encryption of this data. Hackers are very clever. They try to encrypt the backups first, so the company don't realize what is happening. After that, they go for the live data. And when they encrypted that, you cannot recover from the backup because the backup is already encrypted. We selected Veeam for the immutable solution. This means that when a backup is done, this copy cannot be encrypted or modified. Thankfully, for the moment, we were not under any ransomware attack. One thing that happens is we had fire destroying one of our premises. That fire destroys the servers, the virtual machines, the data. Fortunately, with Veeam, we were able to restore that data in another location in a question of hours. Fluidra is at the forefront of transforming the pool and wellness sector, and Veeam now has the capability to back up a big quantity of data on the cloud. All the components in the pool can bring us data. For example, the robot cleaning the pool can put data on the cloud, and we can make decisions on that data, maybe doing predictable maintenance. It sounds futuristic, but Veeam can help us do that. Their teams are really knowledgeable, developing solutions that are helping us. For example, when an employee leaves the company, after 30 days, Microsoft is removing this data. With the Veeam backup solution, we can keep this data with the retention policies that we define, so we have the control. Veeam allows us to forget about having data protected. For us, Veeam is not just a vendor, it's a partner.
Awesome. Well, we always, again, love to hear from our customers, and in particular, those who are in those kinds of leadership positions. So hopefully that gave you all just some food to think about in terms of how you can up-level the importance of backup, recovery, resilience within your organization, because as you can hear from David, data really is at the core of what they're doing. You would think not, because it's a brick and mortar kind of experience, but he talked a bit about how important data is in a lot of their product delivery, and ultimately how that's going to keep them successful and innovating in the future so that they have that competitive advantage in the space. And again, ultimately looking at Veeam as a partner to be increasing a lot of that efficiency, decreasing risk, all those good business focused things that sometimes we don't have enough time to spend thinking about when we're looking at speeds and feeds. But it does all come together. Speeds and feeds are a very critical part of this whole equation. So, Cade, why don't you take us home and kind of bring this whole data lifecycle story and the lens through vendor relationships together?
Yeah, so hopefully it was clear as we were going through, right? So you've got the data lifecycle management. Ultimately, if I was going to line these all up in a line that all like hook into each other, we would start with that application. It always has to start with that application, wherever that may be, whether it's on Kubernetes, whether it's on a virtual machine, whether it's on a physical server. Ultimately, it has to start there, whether you're building or buying. Then you have to run it somewhere. So you've got the infrastructure lifecycle management. So you're going to build your infrastructure. Maybe you're going to do that manually. Maybe you're going to do that using infrastructure as code or other automation tools. And then you're going to manage that ongoing, repeated, continuous lifecycle. Then that's where I think infrastructure goes two ways. It is going to deploy your data services, such as your database servers, or your database PaaS services in the cloud. And then you're going to also look at your security and your observability around that. So all of the lifecycle management are all intertwined with each other. And over the top of that, you've got the people, the process over that technology lifecycle management, making sure that you're governing the data that you're using, only the people that you want to have access to that data or that infrastructure or the security posture is all under that one roof. It allows you to collaborate. It allows you to change. It allows you to look at that redundant. We use ROT. Leah, I don't know if you went into it, but basically ROT from an acronym point of view is your data, and this is part of that data lifecycle management. It's the redundant or the obsolete or trivial data. It's about understanding, well, do we need it anymore? And it goes back to that hygienic way of being able to understand your data. If you don't need it, get rid of it, because it's probably costing you money to store it somewhere. And then making sure that that data is in the most quality data and is on the most efficient storage. It's being protected. It provides resilience and all of that good stuff.
All of that good stuff, right? There's lots that we can be ingesting here in order to be building better data lifecycle management practices and having all of that be told through the lens of these vendor relationships, because they will continue to be rocky. They will continue to provide unexpected value. It really is kind of that, life is like a box of chocolates thing, because with vendor relationships, you really never know what you're going to get. But at least with Veeam, you know that there will always be some fun. I think when I was putting these visuals together, I'm noticing a trend of like how much blue there is and how much, pool imagery that we've had today. So maybe I was just kind of subliminally getting ready for Veeam On next month, which is in the beautiful San Diego, California area. And I think that we have a little bit of a sizzle video to show everybody. So let's roll that final clip. So if you would like to join us in San Diego, get your tan on, sit by the pool, be sure to register for Veeam On. We will also have incredible content. I'll actually be at the demo stations all week long. So if you want to talk a bit about anything you've seen on our show, or I've got a fun project I've been working on that's kind of secret behind the scenes that we're going to be debuting at Veeam On. So if you want to chat with me about that special project, if you want to grab a drink with Cade, be sure to join us at Veeam On this year. I'm sure him and I will be hip and hip, but you can see him better because he's a lot taller and I am unsurprisingly very short, so you'll be easier to find him. But with that, Cade, thank you so much for the time today. I really, really appreciate it. I always enjoy jamming with you. And if you want to catch clips from this show, something that we've started doing as of our last episode is putting little short clips into our different platforms, especially YouTube Shorts. So if you go over to the Veeam YouTube, you can start to see every single week at this same time and day some clips from the show. They'll be very shareable. So in particular, if you want help up-leveling that conversation, we'll be dropping some of those interview clips with Nate. And in particular, one that we didn't have a chance to play today that we are super excited to share with you all. So be sure to tune in to the YouTube channel every Tuesday at noon. From here on out, we will be giving you all some of those great clips. I'm on LinkedIn, Cade is on LinkedIn and lots of other platforms. We're happy to connect and chat with you all. But otherwise, I think it's been a lovely show. Thank you all so much for the time, and we'll see you on the next one.